You probably think you live in a free market, that you choose where to shop, what to buy, which company to trust. You don't. You live inside a system that was designed long before you were born. A system so efficient, so deeply embedded that most people never even notice it. Every day you buy gasoline. You order products online. You search for information. You use banks. You take medicine. And almost every one of those actions feeds the same kind of corporate structure. One that concentrates power, eliminates competition, and quietly transfers wealth upward. This isn't an accident. And it isn't new. The architecture of this system was built over 150 years ago by one man. Not a politician. Not a king. Not a government. A businessman. John D. Rockefeller is usually remembered as an oil tycoon, the founder of Standard Oil, the richest man in modern history. But that description misses the point. Rockefeller didn't just build an oil empire. He built a method. A repeatable, scalable blueprint for corporate control. One that survived the breakup of his company, outlived him by generations, and quietly became the foundation of the modern global economy. When Standard Oil was broken up in 1911, people thought the story was over. They believed the monopoly had been defeated. That competition had won. It hadn't, because the company was never the real invention. The method was. That method didn't die when Standard Oil was dismantled. It evolved. It spread. And today it runs the world you live in. The platforms you depend on. The industries you can't avoid. The corporations that are too big to fail and too powerful to challenge. This is not a conspiracy theory. There are no secret meetings in dark rooms. This system is legal, documented, taught in business schools, written into corporate law, tax codes, and regulatory frameworks. And once you see how it works, you start seeing it everywhere. This story isn't really about oil or Rockefeller as a person. It's about how efficiency became power, how consolidation replaced competition, and how a system designed to bring order to chaos ended up shaping nearly every aspect of modern life. Because understanding this system isn't academic. It's practical. It's personal. And for anyone trying to navigate money, work, or power in the modern world, it's survival. In the next part, we'll look at who Rockefeller really was, and why he didn't see himself as a villain, but as a man chosen to bring order to a broken economy. To understand the system Rockefeller built, you first have to understand how he saw the world. John D. Rockefeller didn't believe markets were fair. He didn't believe competition made people better. And he definitely didn't believe chaos should be tolerated. He believed chaos was a moral failure. Rockefeller grew up in two worlds at once. On one side, a father who was a con man, a drifter who sold fake miracle cures and disappeared for long stretches of time. On the other, a deeply religious mother, who taught discipline, sacrifice, and absolute moral certainty. From this contradiction came Rockefeller's core belief, that the world was broken, and that it was his responsibility to organize it. When oil was discovered in Pennsylvania in 1859, the industry exploded overnight. Thousands rushed in. Prices collapsed, then spiked. Booms turned into busts. Refineries opened and failed just as fast. It was loud, unstable, wasteful. And Rockefeller despised it. While others chased oil in the ground, he saw something more important. The bottleneck. Not drilling, refining, turning crude oil into usable fuel. That was where control could be built. Rockefeller didn't want to gamble. He wanted certainty. By his early 20s, he was already obsessed with efficiency. He tracked every cost, every loss, every unnecessary expense. And what he saw disgusted him. Dozens of refineries doing the same thing. Competing on price, duplicating infrastructure, destroying each other's margins. To Rockefeller, this wasn't healthy competition. It was sin. He famously said, "Competition is a sin." Most people hear that as greed. But Rockefeller meant it literally. In his mind, competition wasted capital, wasted labor, and created instability that harmed society as a whole. Consolidation, on the other hand, created order. Order created efficiency. Efficiency created progress. If one company could do the job better than 50, then 50 should not exist. This wasn't hypocrisy to him. It was moral logic. Rockefeller truly believed that by eliminating competitors, he was doing society a favor. Lower prices, reliable supply, predictable outcomes. And if some businesses had to be destroyed along the way, that was simply the cost of progress. This belief would guide every decision he made. He wouldn't try to win markets. He would end them. He wouldn't outcompete rivals. He would absorb or erase them. And he wouldn't rely on luck or innovation alone. He would build a system. One that made his dominance inevitable. In the next part, we'll break down that system step by step. The 4 mechanisms Rockefeller perfected. That still define corporate power today. Because once you understand the method, you'll realize Rockefeller didn't just change one industry. He rewrote the rules for all of them. Rockefeller didn't rely on instinct. He didn't rely on luck. And he didn't rely on brute force. He relied on a method. A method so effective that it could be copied, scaled, and reused across industries, generations, and centuries. At its core, the Rockefeller method rests on 4 pillars. Together, they form a closed system of control. Once all 4 are in place, competition becomes optional, and eventually impossible. Pillar 1, vertical integration. Most businesses control one step of a process. They buy inputs. They produce something. They sell it. Rockefeller refused to stop there. He wanted to control every step, from raw materials, to production, to transportation, to storage, to distribution, to final sale. Anything that used to be a separate business, anything that used to make profit for someone else, Rockefeller pulled inside his own company. He made his own barrels, owned the rail cars, controlled the warehouses, negotiated shipping rates that no competitor could match. This gave him something far more powerful than market share. It gave him cost dominance. He could sell below his competitors' prices and still make money. They couldn't. Which leads to the second pillar. Pillar 2, horizontal consolidation. Rockefeller didn't want to beat competitors. He wanted to remove them. His approach was simple. First, he would offer to buy them, often at fair market value, sometimes even generous. If they accepted, they kept their wealth, and often their jobs. If they refused, the rules changed. Rockefeller would drop prices below cost. He could afford to lose money longer than they could survive. This wasn't competition. It was economic siege. The outcome was always the same. Sell or disappear. This strategy wasn't emotional. It was systematic. Buy the strong. Crush the stubborn. Absorb the remains. Over time, entire markets collapsed into a single dominant player. But Rockefeller knew that dominance creates enemies. Which brings us to the third pillar. Pillar 3, regulatory capture. Rockefeller didn't just operate inside markets. He shaped the rules of those markets. He worked with politicians, with regulators, with lawmakers. Standards were introduced that his facilities could meet, and smaller competitors could not. Shipping regulations favored his scale. Safety requirements favored his infrastructure. Everything was legal. Everything was justified as protecting the public. But the effect was clear. The rules didn't stop him. They protected him. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of the system. Regulation doesn't always limit power. Sometimes it locks it in. And once regulators and corporations become intertwined, competition isn't blocked by force. It's blocked by paperwork. Which brings us to the final pillar. The most subtle one, and the most enduring. Pillar 4, philanthropy as power. By the early 20th century, Rockefeller was deeply unpopular. He was seen as ruthless, predatory, inhuman. So he changed the narrative. He became a philanthropist. Foundations, universities, medical research, public health initiatives. On the surface, this looked like generosity, and some of it genuinely was. But philanthropy served another purpose. It created legitimacy. It shaped education. It influenced research priorities. It redirected public anger into gratitude. And it did something else. It preserved control. Wealth placed into foundations wasn't taxed the same way. It wasn't redistributed. It remained under influence, often for generations. This was the final lock on the system. Economic dominance, legal protection, moral authority. Once all 4 pillars were in place, Rockefeller no longer needed to fight markets. He owned them. In the next part, we'll see why breaking up his company didn't break this system at all, and how the moment that was supposed to end his power actually made it stronger than ever. By the early 1900s, public pressure was impossible to ignore. Journalists exposed the tactics. Politicians demanded action. The word monopoly became toxic. In 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court finally acted. Standard Oil was declared illegal and ordered to be broken apart. 34 separate companies. Independent, competing, free. On paper, it looked like victory. The most powerful monopoly in American history had been defeated. But this is where most people misunderstand what happened. Because the breakup didn't destroy the system. It proved how powerful the system really was. Rockefeller didn't lose control. He didn't lose wealth. And he didn't lose influence. He owned shares in all 34 companies. Before the breakup, Standard Oil was one giant entity. After the breakup, it became dozens of dominant regional players, all owned by the same man. And something unexpected happened. The combined value of those companies skyrocketed. Competition between the fragments increased efficiency. Innovation accelerated. Profits grew. Rockefeller's wealth didn't shrink. It multiplied. What was supposed to be punishment turned into optimization. This is the critical lesson. Governments broke up the company, but they left the method intact. Vertical integration still existed. Consolidation still happened, just regionally. Legal structures evolved instead of disappearing. Ownership became more abstract, not less. The monopoly didn't die. It reconfigured. Over the next century, many of those companies quietly merged again. Different names. Different logos. Same lineage. The system learned how to survive regulation. It learned how to fragment when necessary, recombine when convenient, and always preserve control at the ownership level. This is why the Standard Oil breakup is often misunderstood. It wasn't the end of monopolies. It was their upgrade. From visible giants to distributed networks. From one obvious target to many legally separate entities that behaved like one. The lesson was clear to every future corporation. If the government comes for you, don't fight the system. Adapt it, because once power is structural, not personal, it becomes almost impossible to remove. In the next part, we'll fast forward to the present, and you'll see that this wasn't a historical anomaly. It was a prototype, and nearly every dominant corporation today is built on the same blueprint. If Rockefeller were alive today, he wouldn't be shocked by the modern economy. He would recognize it, because the biggest corporations of the 21st century didn't invent a new system. They inherited one. Take Amazon. It didn't just build an online store. It built an ecosystem. Warehouses, logistics networks, delivery fleets, payment systems, cloud infrastructure. Amazon doesn't just sell products. It controls how products move, how data flows, and how competitors survive. Just like Rockefeller didn't just refine oil. He controlled barrels, railroads, storage, and distribution. Amazon controls retail, logistics, and the digital infrastructure behind the internet itself. When competitors appear, Amazon doesn't panic. It buys them, or copies them, or undercuts them using scale no one else can match. Different century. Same method. Now look at big tech. Holding companies, parent entities, dozens of subsidiaries. This structure didn't come from Silicon Valley innovation culture. It came from the trust. A legal shell that owns everything, while producing nothing. It shields liability, optimizes taxes, and makes regulation almost impossible. Break up which company? The parent? Or the subsidiaries? Rockefeller solved this problem in the 1880s. Modern corporations just refined it. The pharmaceutical industry uses the same logic. Control research, influence regulators, extend patents, shape medical standards. When the companies funding clinical trials are also shaping approval processes, competition doesn't disappear loudly. It disappears quietly, through paperwork, through compliance costs, through best practices that only the largest players can afford. And then there's finance. Banks aren't just banks anymore. They're holding structures layered on top of holding structures. When regulation tightens, complexity increases. When oversight grows, transparency shrinks. This isn't accidental. Complexity is protection. Every one of these industries learned the same lesson. You don't need to dominate consumers directly. If you dominate the system they depend on, infrastructure beats innovation. Scale beats choice. Structure beats intent. And from the consumer's perspective, it all feels normal. You're not forced. You're not threatened. You're just guided toward the fastest option, the cheapest option, the most convenient option, until alternatives slowly stop existing. This is why the system is so powerful. It doesn't feel like control. It feels like efficiency. In the next part, we'll confront the uncomfortable question that follows from this. If the system is everywhere, and it works, is it actually possible to escape it? At this point, a natural question comes up. If the system is everywhere, if it controls infrastructure, regulation, distribution, and scale, why not just leave it? Why not opt out? Buy elsewhere. Use alternatives. Choose differently. In theory, that sounds simple. In practice, it's almost impossible. Because the system doesn't control luxuries. It controls necessities. You need transportation. That means fuel. Fuel comes from a small cluster of companies that coordinate prices and dominate supply. You need goods. You can avoid one platform, maybe two. But the logistics, pricing pressure, and convenience pull everything back toward the same networks. You need information. Search, maps, email, video, communication. You're not choosing between dozens of equal options. You're choosing between branches of the same tree. You need healthcare. Your doctor is trained in a standardized system. Your insurance operates inside regulatory frameworks. Your treatment options are shaped by research priorities that favor scale, patents, and long-term profitability. None of this feels like coercion. That's the genius of it. You're free to choose, as long as you choose inside the system. And here's the part most people miss. The system isn't evil. It's efficient. It delivers cheaper products, faster services, reliable supply, technological miracles that would have been unthinkable a century ago. This is why it survives every crisis. Because it works. The problem isn't that the system fails consumers. The problem is that it concentrates rewards far away from them. Efficiency at the bottom. Accumulation at the top. You get convenience. Someone else gets permanence. And once a system reaches this level of efficiency, destroying it becomes politically and economically dangerous. Break it apart and prices rise. Supply chains fracture. Stability disappears. So the system remains. Not because everyone loves it, but because everyone depends on it. This is the real legacy of Rockefeller's method. Not domination through force. Domination through necessity. Which leaves only one real question. If you can't escape the system, how do you live inside it? That's what we'll talk about next. At some point, resistance turns into exhaustion. You can try to fight the system. Support antitrust laws. Pay more to buy local. Use inferior alternatives out of principle. That path is noble and endless. You can try to escape the system. Disconnect. Opt out. Live off-grid. For most people, that's fantasy. The system is too deeply woven into modern life. Which leaves a third option. Understand it. Because once you understand how the system works, you stop reacting emotionally to it. You stop seeing corporations as villains or saviors. You stop expecting fairness from structures that were never designed to provide it. And you start making clearer decisions. The system isn't personal. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't hate you. It optimizes. It rewards scale. It rewards ownership. It rewards those who position themselves upstream instead of downstream. That's what Rockefeller understood better than anyone else. He didn't just sell oil. He owned the system that made oil unavoidable. Everyone else paid into it. He extracted from it. And that pattern never stopped. Every generation sees new names, new technologies, new narratives. But the structure stays the same. Vertical integration, consolidation, regulatory influence, legitimacy through philanthropy. Once you see that pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. And you stop being surprised by outcomes that once felt unfair or random. This isn't about admiration. And it isn't about condemnation. It's about clarity. Because clarity changes how you move through the world. What you trust. What you ignore. What you question. And most importantly, what you prepare for. If this breakdown helped you see the system more clearly, if you're interested in understanding the forces that shape money, power, and history beneath the surface, then Finance Archives is where these stories live. Here we don't chase headlines. We trace patterns. We study systems. And we look at how the past quietly designs the present. Subscribe to Finance Archives if you want to keep learning how the world actually works. Because you may not be able to escape the system. But once you can see it, it never controls you the same way again.